Hello and welcome to the course Climate Hazards and Disaster Mitigation. Today we are going to discuss study of disaster management frameworks. So far we have explored the science policy interface for disaster mitigation. We have appreciated the concept of disaster risk reduction and the key economic impacts of disaster, and we also discussed what are the key aspects of emergency and humanitarian response with relevant case studies. Today our learning objectives are to understand the structure, necessity and key components of a disaster management framework, to examine the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders involved in disaster management, to discuss case studies related to best disaster management practices, and lastly to explore the linkages between disaster risk reduction and sustainable development goals. To begin with, let us understand what is a disaster management framework. So, disaster management framework is a systematic and institutionalized governance structure that defines authority, roles and responsibility, decision making hierarchy and coordination mechanisms across the entire disaster cycle, whether it is before the disaster, during the disaster or after a disaster. This framework provides a long-term, multi-sectoral and multi-actor approach, ensuring clarity, predictability and effective coordination in disaster preparedness, response, recovery and resilience building, thereby enabling timely and coherent action during crisis. So, in a nutshell, your disaster management framework will identify who is the governing authority, who makes the crucial decisions, what are the roles and responsibility of different actors. By mean of actors we say who are the involved persons, like different state agencies, government agencies, they are the actors in this case. Then what is the decision making hierarchy, that who follows whose orders, that is very important. And again reporting hierarchy is also important, who should report to whom, because there are some reporting incidents and somebody will take a call based on that conditions, and the coordination mechanisms across various disaster cycles. So why this is required, because you should have a very long term and institutionalized mechanism, otherwise that could create chaos, particularly in case of disaster. In case of disaster, if these SOPs are not in place, then that could waste lot of time, and this time is very precious in saving lives and alleviating the suffering. So in disaster management frameworks, they are crucial because they provide a structured whole community approach to reduce risk, enhance preparedness and ensure effective response and recovery. Thereby they save lives, protect our assets and building resilience against the influence of hazards. A coordinated government, private and community effort is very clear through policies and guidelines. So they transform the chaotic action into an organized actions, moving beyond mere relief to proactive risk reduction and sustainable rebuilding, making communities safer and stronger. Now, why these frameworks matter? Because they essentially reduce the risk and impacts by identifying the hazards and vulnerability assessment. They enhance our preparedness by ensuring early warning systems, data sharing and coordination before disasters. They promote coordinated response across various institutions and sectors, and they build long-term resilience by framing proper recovery strategies. They ensure inclusivity by prioritizing vulnerable groups in all disaster phases, and they also provide legal and policy support to ensure accountability and consistency. Now, why this framework is required? This framework is required because if there is a lack of cohesive framework, there can be fragmented responses. Somebody may respond in a particular manner, other person may respond in a particular manner. So that would create two disjoint and potentially conflicting efforts. There will be institutional overlaps because multiple institutions are involved, so they keep on addressing the same issue, and that would become more repetition and duplication of work and inefficient resource allocation. There can be delayed decisions because if there are no clear guidelines, people would ponder upon what to do, they have discussions and all, and that could result in delayed decision, which is very critical in saving lives. and weak accountability. When roles are not defined, it becomes very difficult to make people responsible for their actions, and that can be a loophole in the system where people who did not perform their duty properly, and they can escape through this particular loophole. So discussing the disaster management frameworks, the global framework we have already discussed in the earlier lecture, that is the Sendai framework. So it is an international agreement which setting the goals, targets and priorities for reducing disaster losses and building resilience worldwide. National frameworks include India formulated its own Disaster Management Act in 2005, which defines roles of central, state and local government agencies. Priorities for action, they include understanding disaster risk, strengthening governance for risk management, investing in DRR for resilience, and enhancing preparedness for response and recovery. Stakeholders role, so we define the shared responsibility among government, private sector, civil society and communities, and we have tools that should monitor the progress, and there are indicators which can assess the effectiveness of the framework. So framework versus policies versus institutions. So institutions are the overarching structures like government or laws. So there are certain laws in place, so the institutions are being set up by that laws. Frameworks are the organized systems of rules or processes, like there could be a cyber security framework, IT governance framework, a disaster management framework, that could be different for different disasters. Like for cyclone you should have different one, for heat waves you should have different one. And policies, there are specific rules or guidelines within those frameworks. They dictate the behavior and decisions to ensure consistent, aligned operations and goal achievement, reducing risk and improving efficiency. Now there are two main approaches. One is a risk-centered approach, second is a response-centered. What is the difference? Response-centered frameworks are reactive, that means they focus on actions during and immediately after a disaster. Risk-centered framework are proactive, that means they focus on preventing and mitigating the disaster even before the event occurs. So talking into more detail about this, so response-centered or called reactive, so they focus on actions during or after disaster, like they could be emergency services, humanitarian aid, relief, search and rescue operation. So the goal is to save lives, reduce health impacts and meet the basic needs. While risk-centered, it aims at preventing and minimizing risk before a disaster strikes. So mitigation, preparedness, land use planning, early warning system, resilience, policy development, these are all activities. Building long-term resilience, reducing vulnerability and addressing the root causes of disaster is one of the important things that that is a focus of risk-centered approaches. So the modern approach advocates from a reactive, that we should move from a reactive and relief focused model to a more proactive and risk informed approach, because it is always better to prepare yourself. We say prevention is better than cure, so we should go towards a more proactive approach than a reactive approach. So how can we do that? We can use data, technology like remote sensing, AI, community participation and integrated planning to create more resilient systems. A further step in a proactive approach can be multi-hazard approach in frameworks. So a multi-hazard approach uses a single integrated framework to assess and manage risk from various hazards, recognizing their interrelationship, that is whether they are triggering, where they are compounding or amplifying impacts rather than treating them in isolation. So in one of our very initial lectures, we have discussed this, that how hazards can be, what are the primary, secondary and tertiary hazards, whether they are compounding or triggering. So we have already discussed that. So if we use this information, that what is their compounding effect, that could be more better in solving our problems rather than treating them in isolation. So such frameworks provide a more holistic risk assessment, and we can have more coordinated action for having relief and planning the risk assessments, and the relief and rescue operations thereby can be coordinated in a much better way if you are using a multi-hazard approach. So let us look at the factors. So it combines multiple hazards like earthquake, floods, landslide and their interactions, whether they are cascading or simultaneous, into a comprehensive analysis. It gives us more holistic vulnerability analysis, like power and so for different services how they are affected, like how power and water are affected, how social systems are affected, and what are their dependencies. We can use advanced technologies like AIs, sensors, unmanned aerial vehicles for real-time data collection, mapping and analysis. So we can create actionable insights for planning and response. We can develop multi-hazard early warning system which focuses on such hazards for a given region, and we can also promote collaboration across several sectors to implement and integrate policies and practice. Now moving ahead, frameworks for urban and rural disasters should be different. Why? Because the way the exposure and vulnerability and response capacity for urban area and a rural setup will be different. So the framework should have certain distinction between them. The urban disasters, they if we see exposure, they are highly dense population, complex infrastructure. They can have cascading risks, like heat waves can translate into fires or system failures, and we have to manage rapid evacuation, and there are interconnected services as well. In case of a rural disaster, the exposure to natural hazards like flood and landslides in rural areas, where reaching is sometimes a challenge, so you cannot have ease of accessibility. Also, these areas are in isolation and have lower adaptive capacity, so we should think in that particular manner, and it may require decentralized community based and efforts, and sometimes response time can be extended. So for urban disasters, stronger infrastructure and governance is required, and they are highly vulnerable, and there are resilient gaps. Rural disasters, they can be highly vulnerable because of limited resources, not of their exposure, but the adaptive capacity is limited. So we require dedicated efforts to mitigate those disasters. What are the stakeholder roles within this framework? So if we see that in different cycles, whether it is prevention, response, recovery, etc., what are the roles? Like NGOs, and government agencies, they have role in responses, that how they can respond in the case of any disaster. Private sector and government sector both can help in recovery, where they can rebuild that particular area. In case of response, media can disseminate warning. Again, academia, where the scientists and all, they can provide support for data planning, which can help in response, like they can give alternate routes and they have other mechanisms in place, that okay, if this route is not working, what can be alternate route. So there can be a study which can be done earlier. Even academia can support prevention by identifying the risk levels, and the community, they are the first responders, so they can make themselves more adaptable, so they can prevent such kind of disaster. So it requires a multi-sector coordination and collaboration amongst all stakeholders for effective disaster management. What are the limitations and gaps in these frameworks? So major limitations are governance and policy. So there are coordination issues, there is insufficient local autonomy because there is a hierarchy which has to be followed. Resources and implementation, there is insufficient funding for mitigation. There is lack of disaster resilient infrastructure which is there. We have poor data sharing. We have enough data at local level, but we are not sharing it among all coordinating authorities. We neglect the indigenous knowledge, whether traditional knowledge available for us, and we fail to learn from the past disaster. We are repeating our mistakes, so we are very poor in that particular area. So it is very important that what are the learnings which are taken from the past that can be forwarded into future, and the emerging challenges are not considered, like climate change integration, urbanization issues, so they can be integrated in the framework. So transition in India's disaster management framework. So we have moved from post disaster relief to a pre-disaster prevention. So that is a very important point we had in our transition. we brought a legal and institutional framework. We brought a Disaster Management Act, and there was an amendment in 2024 as well. So we are more proactive and holistic, and we are covering the National Disaster Management Plan in 2018. It covered all the phases of disaster cycle. Now we have community and financial mainstreaming, that is, we are empowering communities through Aapda Mitras. They are called disaster friends, and we are using technology integration. We are implementing nature-based solutions as well, and we are aligning to global frameworks for effective coordination across different sectors. So what evolution we have done from relief to risk governance? So India's geographical diversity and population density make it highly vulnerable to natural and man-made disasters. So these disasters pose challenge to governance, public safety, environment and sustainable development. So before 2005, we were more reactive and relief centric. We have fragmented legal provisions through IPC or CRPC. Now what are the turning points that triggered it? 1999 super cyclone of Odisha, 2001 Gujarat earthquake. So these events exposed gaps in preparedness, coordination and institutional capacity. So as an outcome, we had a shift towards more proactive integrated disaster risk management and the enactment of Disaster Management Act 2005. So this act provides a legal and institutional framework for disaster risk reduction. So the key areas are, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response and recovery. In the institutional setup, they have NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, that is the apex body which is chaired by the Prime Minister. It sets the policies and guidelines. Then there are state disaster management authorities. It is headed by the Chief Minister. It is responsible for state level coordination, and it is further strengthened by the District Disaster Management Authority for execution at local level. So this is the framework. Under Ministry of Home Affairs, this Disaster Management Authority functions, and then it coordinates with the state government and district administration subsequently. Then there is NIDM, which is National Institute of Disaster Management, which is organization responsible for studying all the frameworks and bringing out policy matters. NDRF is the implementation agency. There is National Disaster Relief Force, so it will be on ground efforts. And similarly, they have the state and district management authorities, and there are committees. So there is a coordination required between all the committees for effective management. So if we look the National Disaster Management structure, it is a 3-tier structure as indicated earlier: national, state and district level, and they have the certain agencies which are coordinating with them. In worst cases, armed forces are also called. If your NDRF is not able to provide relief and rescue, then armed forces are roped in because they are highly trained in such kind of situation. If it is a state level, many disasters require intervention from police and fire services or civil defense and other volunteers. So what is a response which is set up across the country? So there are warnings from state and nodal agencies, like IMD may issue warning or Central Water Commission may issue a warning. So the control room at Ministry of Home Affairs will get the information, then that is further coordinated with the state government agencies. NDMA is in loop because if required, NDRF can be deployed or central forces can be deployed. And then there is the nodal disaster management and relief department in state government. So they will activate your police and fire services for any support, and ultimately the district administration is responsible for on-scene management, and in this way they cater to the affected site. So let us discuss some case studies. So Odisha's cyclone disaster management. So we see that in recent years there is Odisha have faced lot of cyclones. So it is one of the most cyclone prone state in India, but in 1999 it transformed itself. The super cyclone struck and they had a lot of damages. So that was a turning point in their history, where they developed their own cyclone management model, and now it is one of the success stories. So Odisha model, which is of disaster management, is a globally recognized pioneering framework that transformed India's most disaster vulnerable region into a leader in cyclone resilience. So it was developed after the 1999 super cyclone. So what are the key principles? So this had a zero casualty philosophy and institutional setup. So in 1999 tragedy, over 10,000 lives were lost. Following that, Odisha became the first state to institutionalize the State Disaster Management Authority in 2000. So the primary mandate was zero casualty, so there should be no casualty at any cost. So they also had a specialized force of Odisha Disaster Rapid Action Force, which was set up. They had massive infrastructural development. So they developed cyclone shelters. Around 800 plus multi-purpose disaster resilient shelters were constructed along the 480-kilometer coastline. So you can see this is one such shelter. So vulnerable families were assisted in moving from straw huts to disaster resistant houses. They also, protected the coastline by constructing embankments and mangrove plantations, because mangroves act as natural buffers against the sea ingress. Then they focused on community-based approach, where village committees were formed and volunteers were trained in search and rescue operations. They empowered local governance. So they amended the Gram Panchayat Act to give local bodies more control for disaster planning, and they had more women's participation. There were self-help groups and women volunteers that were heavily involved in awareness and evacuation efforts. They also had advanced early warning system. So it was the first state to have an end-to-end early warning dissemination system for coastal communities. Last mile connectivity was ensured, that around 1200 villages were connected, where sirens and mass messaging was the means. The system uses satellite imagery, Doppler radar and partnerships with the international organizations to provide accurate and timely alerts. So you can see this is the technology which they have adopted. So there is a modern weather radar which is deployed. Also rapid response and evacuation. So during cyclones such as Philion in 2013, Fanny 2019, Dana 2024, they evacuated close to 1 lakh people in Philion, close to 1.5 lakh, close to 10 lakh people in Philion, 15 lakh in Fanny, and 6 lakh plus in Cyclone Dana. So that was the amazing work they did, and there was no casualty which was reported in these cyclones. So 2019 cyclone Fanny, it was one of the strongest cyclone to hit the east coast of India in 2 decades. It made landfall near Puri in Odisha on 3rd May, and the speeds were close to 200 km per hour. So you can see this is the eye of the cyclone, and this is hitting the Odisha coast. So you can see how devastating it was. And this is a scene for the Odisha railway station. You can see the entire station is devastated. Somewhere in the local area you can see that trees are uprooted, even the buildings are damaged due to that. So early warning and preparedness. So NDMA coordinated with the IMD to give the cyclone track warning more precisely, and the State Disaster Management Authority. 1.2 million people were evacuated from coastal areas to safe shelters before the landfall. They ensured there is coordination between agencies like NDRF, Armed Forces, Coast Guard, etc., and the teams were pre-positioned to mitigate any casualty. So immediate restoration of power, water and communication was done within 48 hours. Food, shelter and medical aid were provided to the affected communities. Despite the intensity of cyclone, loss of life was minimal, around 64 deaths compared to similar past events, demonstrating success of NDMA's early warning and evacuation strategy. What are the key learnings? Effective early warning, community preparedness and coordination between agencies can reduce disaster impacts. Coming to the last part, disaster risk reduction and sustainable development goals. So there are 17 SDGs. So 10 out of 17 SDGs are linked to disaster risk reduction. There are 25 targets which are being prescribed. So DRR is a very core component of the development strategy. So in goal 1, which says end poverty in all forms everywhere, so target 1.5, that is connected to DRR. So the target 1.5, it states that we should build resilience of poor and those in vulnerable situations and reduce their exposure and vulnerability to climate related extremes. Goal 2, which caters to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So in that target 2.4, that is linked to ensuring sustainable food production systems and implement resilient agriculture practices that increase productivity and production to maintain ecosystems and strengthen the capacity for adaptation to climate change, extreme weather, drought, flooding, etc. So this is how the linkages to DRR and SDGs are made. Goal 3, the goal is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. In that target 3.D, which strengthens the capacity of all countries, in particular developing countries, for early warning, risk reduction and management of national and global health risks. Goal 4, quality education. It ensures inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. In that target 4.7, it ensures all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyle, human rights, gender equality and promotion of peace and culture, and global citizenship. Goal 6, it should ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Target 6.6 emphasizes to protect and restore water-related ecosystems, including mountains, forests, wetlands, rivers, aquifers and lakes. Goal 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. Target 9.1, it focuses to develop quality, reliable and sustainable and resilient infrastructure, including regional and trans-border infrastructure to support economic development and human well-being with a focus on affordable and equitable access for all. Goal 11, it focuses to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. In that there are 4 targets related to DRR. Target 11.1 ensures access for all to adequate, safe and affordable basic services and upgrade slums. Target 11.3, it enhances inclusivity, sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated and sustainable human settlement, planning and management. Target 11.4, strengthen efforts to protect, safeguard world's cultural and natural heritage. And target 11.5, significantly reduce the number of deaths, the number of people affected and substantially decrease the direct economic losses. Goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. Target 13.1 aims to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate related hazards and natural disasters. 13.2, integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies and planning. And 13.3, improve education, awareness and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation and early warning systems. Goal 14 is to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. In that target 14.2 informs sustainably manage and protect marine and coastal ecosystem to avoid significant adverse impacts and strengthening their resilience. Lastly, goal 15, to protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forest, combat desertification and halt and reverse land degradation and biodiversity loss. In that 5 targets are there, starting with target 15.5 to ensure conservation and sustainable use of terrestrial and inland freshwater ecosystem like forest, wetland, mountain and dry lands. Target 15.2 for sustainable management of all types of forest to reduce deforestation, restore degraded forest and increase afforestation. Target 15.3 to combat desertification, restore degraded land and soil and also the land affected by desertification, drought and floods. Target 15.4 to conserve mountain ecosystems including their biodiversity. And target 15.9 to integrate ecosystem and biodiversity values into national and local planning. What are the key takeaways from today's lecture? Disaster management framework is a systematic, institutionalized framework structure that defines authority, roles and responsibility, decision making hierarchy, and coordination mechanisms across the entire disaster cycle, that is before, during and after a disaster. A multi-hazard approach in disaster management is often effective because it takes into consideration various hazards, their interrelationships, whether they are triggering one, compounding or cascading, and rather than treating them in isolation. And lastly, we also saw that how SDGs and disaster risk reduction are closely interlinked, and they establish DRR as a core development strategy. Here's an activity suggestion for you. You can explore more case studies similar to one discussed on Cyclone Fani that describe success stories of disaster management in India. These are some additional learning resources suggested. Thank you for your attention. In the next lecture, we'll discuss the Disaster Management Act 2005 India overview. Thank you.